Today on Poetry and Poets with SueAn Stradling Collins, we are going to talk about the poetry of Ted Kooser. Ted Kooser is still living. He lives in Nebraska. He was born in Ames, Iowa in 1939, making him 82 years old. This is a picture of him. I love that picture. I just love him. As you can see by the amount of books I have there, these are all mine, by the way. The library does not own any of his works, but we are buying some on Overdrive, so you will be able to get his books through the Overdrive app or the Libby app if you have that. And I hope that you will end up loving him as much as I do. I was supposed to get to hear him speak in Flagstaff many years ago, but his wife had become ill, and so the day of the poetry reading, we were told that he wasn't going to be able to be there, and that's been a regret of mine because I didn't get to meet him. But that was where I first started learning about his poetry. He's just down home. One of the things that he had to say about poetry is that poetry should be something that poets write that doesn't make people feel stupid, is a quote of his. So the poetry he writes is very down home, is very everyday type poetry. And that might be what I love about it. He was the Poet Laureate for the United States from 2004 to 2006. And he also won a Pulitzer Prize for his poetry in 2005. One poetry book that I do not have of his, that while I was looking into all this, was published in September of 2020, and I actually don't own it. So I'll have to remedy that one soon. I also have a biography of his, which I couldn't find. So I don't know where I've set it. I haven't finished reading it, but I couldn't find it to bring it and show that to you. So anyway, he has a great deal of material. This, the Poetry Home Repair Manual, is a guide for those of you who might want to write poetry. And so he gives you ideas and so forth there. This is a collection of the best poetry in many of his works. And so this might be the one that you want to start with. I am putting that on Overdrive, so that will be available. With all that, I'm going to read some of his poetry to you. This comes from The Wheeling Year, which is a Poet's Field book, and he has these divided by months, and they don't have titles. This is from June. Bumper to bumper, the days stream past, the day-old baked goods store through sometimes a Sunday morning, though sometimes a Sunday morning pulls in, driven by some old man who stops in the present for a moment to buy a little bag of yesterdays. But mostly the days, by the dozen, dry out and get thrown to the birds, sparrows and starlings, to whom each hour is every bit as tasty as the last. Another one from June. Time and again our parents cautioned us that quicksand was waiting just under the water to suck us right out of the world. And though we fooled with finding it, not one of us did. It was all imagination, for the bottom was always solid under us. Barefoot and lucky, we waded the summers. But more than the bottom, it was time that firmly held us up, all of us young and calling back and forth above the surface. So again, this is divided into months and just ideas and thoughts that he has for each month of the year. Wonderful. We'll add that to the stack, maybe. Okay. These two kind of go together, Winter Morning Walks and Braided Creek, A Conversation in Poetry. This, I'm going to read his intro. In the autumn of 1998, during my recovery from surgery and radiation for cancer, I began taking a 2-mile walk each morning. I'd been told by my radiation oncologist to stay out of the sun for a year because of skin sensitivity. So I exercised before dawn, hiking the isolated country roads near where I live, sometimes with my wife, but most often alone. During the previous summer, depressed by my illness, preoccupied by the routines of my treatment, and feeling miserably sorry for myself, I'd all but given up on reading and writing. Then, as autumn began to fade and winter came on, my health began to improve. One morning in November, following my walk, I surprised myself by trying my hand at a poem. Soon I was writing every day. Several years before, my friend Jim Harrison and I had carried on a correspondence in a haiku. As a variation on this, I began pasting my morning poems on postcards and sending them to Jim, whose generosity, patience, and good humor are here acknowledged. What follows is a selection of 100 of those postcards. To me, that is such a cool concept, and I remember sending some poems to some friends of mine on postcards, and of course they never answered. So it didn't work for me and my friends. If you want my address and you want to send me a poem on a postcard, I promise I'll answer. So if you contact the library district through Messenger or message me, you can find me under SueAn Stradling Collins on Facebook. I will write you a poem back, and maybe we can have conversations on postcards. I would love that. But to read a few of these to you, I've marked them, I believe, in here. November 12th, 4:30 a.m. On mornings like this, as hours before dawn I walk the dark hall of the road with my life creaking under my feet, I sometimes take hold of the cold porcelain knob of the moon and turn it, and step into a room warm and yellow, and take my seat at a small wooden table with a border of painted pansies, and wait for my mother to bring me my bowl. And March 20th, the vernal equinox. How important it must be to someone that I am alive and walking, and that I have written these poems. This morning the sun stood right at the end of the road and waited for me. And then the other book that he talked about is called Braided Creek, A Conversation in Poetry. Jim Harrison is the author of A River Runs Through It, as well as other books. You might have seen the movie A River Runs Through It with Brad Pitt and I can't remember who else. So Jim Harrison is also a well-known author. They have some wonderful, they do not give credit as to who wrote which one. They said that it wasn't important, that it was just important that they have it. And so just very short poems that they sent back and forth to each other. And I will share a few of those with you. All those years I had in my pocket, I spent them nickel and dime. On every topographical map, the fingerprints of God. Remember, these are like haikus, so they're just super short. As a boy, when desperate, I'd pray with bare knees on the cold floor. I still do, but from the window, I look like an old man. And the last one I'll read of this. I might have been a welder, kneeling at a fountain of sparks in my mask of stars. To me, he's amazing. He's just amazing, and I love his poetry. I have to say that I found it difficult to choose poems to read to you because there are so many that I love. I don't want to make this go on too long, so A Jar of Buttons. This is a core sample from the floor of the Sea of Mending, a cylinder packed with shells that over many years sank through fathoms of shirts, pearl buttons, blue buttons, and settled together beneath waves of perseverance, an ocean upon which generations of women set forth under the sails of gingham curtains, and seated side by side on decks sometimes salted by tears, made small but important repairs. And this is the last one I'd like to read. It's called A Box of Pastels. It has to do not with this picture specifically, but with the artist Mary Cassatt. I once held on my knees a simple wooden box in which a rainbow lay dusty and broken. It was a set of pastels that had years before belonged to the painter Mary Cassatt, and all of the colors she'd used in her work lay open before me. Those hues she'd most used, the peaches and pinks, were worn down to stubs, while the cool colors, violet, ultramarine, had been set, scarcely touched, to one side. She'd had little patience with darkness, and her heart held only a measure of shadow. I touched the warm dust of those colors, her tools, and left there with light on the tips of my fingers. He's amazing. He's still alive. He's still writing. And I hope that you will take some time to learn about Ted Kooser. He is a delight. And I guess I should tell you, as we're talking about poetry and so forth, I will be retiring the first week of August. And so there are only about 4 more poetry and poets that we will do together. Again, if you contact me, I'd love to share poetry with you. Yeah, and I'll cry a whole lot before we're finished with all this too. So, so we'll see you next week.